Hi guys, welcome to part 8 of our series of videos on moving over to GitHub CI and fixing our nightlies. Right, we haven't recorded anything for quite a while. I did try to record previously, but there's so many problems with video I ended up having to abandon that session. But I have been doing some work over the last few days. So on our last video, which was quite a few months ago, May perhaps, so in September now, we were to recap, we were moving away from Travis and from AppVeyor and starting to use GitHub. And we did all the work required to move to Actions. And that's looking all right. We're generating packages, CI is running, all the tests are running, and so on. I think there's still some problems with the packages themselves, but that's the usual. We just leave these things in the backlog, and we'll address that when we get to it. The key thing really is that the Linux packages are working fine. We've tested those and they seem to be fine. So that's kind of sufficient for us to achieve our target of the sprint, which reminds me that I have not started clocking, so perhaps something like 12:50. So yeah, and we're already over time for this sprint as well. We've already accumulated over 80 hours, so we're really trying hard to close this sprint. The main reason why I've spent so long since the last sprint, as I've mentioned in previous videos, is we've been working on the thesis. And the PhD is now completed, all of that's sorted out of the way. I've updated the README to reflect that. Let's double check we're recording. Here we are. And you can, if you're curious, you can get a link to the thesis itself from the README. I haven't started the process of taking bits of the thesis and putting that into the manual. I'm not entirely sure exactly that's going to work, but that's going to be something for the next sprint, I think, because of course the thesis is designed to be a technical argument, and we spent a lot of time reflecting on a lot of the technical issues, and it's perhaps not very useful if you're just a user of Dogen to go through all these arguments about all the different problems with MDE and all sorts of things. Not entirely sure all this is suitable for a manual. Where I think we're probably closer to what users want is the methodology and components and the domain architecture. So maybe these two chapters will go into our manual. I need to have a think of it. That'll be a story for the next sprint, I guess. But the good news is we don't really have any more distractions with sort of technical things. We can just focus on engineering, which is what I like doing. So hopefully that would be a good sprint now, sprint 32. So to complete this sprint, all we really need to do now is we just need to get this netlist going again. Now, the reason why we can't do that at present is because the nightlists were a bit of a special case. So to recap, we had moved over to CMake presets. And CMake presets are quite nice because they enable you to encapsulate all of the environment needed to run a project into the presets file. And that was working quite nicely for both the CI and the local builds. Where it kind of broke down a bit was with the nightly, because we couldn't get the nightly to fit the structure, sort of the hard-coded structure that we have for everything else. So it is a bit of a peculiar structure, but I'm quite happy with it now, which is a product name and then branch name. In fact, to be honest, it shouldn't really be a branch name, but it should be something like local or remote or something like that. Because the idea here is that we use Git work trees, and we like to have lots and lots of, well, at least a couple of branches checked out. One for the master that we never touch, and then whatever branches we're working on, the feature branches. That means we don't have to worry about things like recompiling every time we change branches and so on. So anyway, that's a structure that I find quite useful in terms of developments, but it is problematic when it gets to the nightly, because, and now I need to flip screens here, I think. Let me just move these guys out of the way. So where things become a bit tricky with the nightlies is that we had a bit of sing and dance. Let's make sure we're in the English keyboard. A bit of singing and dance with the nightlies, because we had this concept of Dogen and Dogen pristine. Now, the idea here was that we couldn't really get the tests to. So when we do run a nightly, we run this thing called full generation. And what that does is it forces the generation of all facets across the entire physical space. So many things that we may not necessarily need for Dogen per se are generated. The purpose of it is being that we're trying to see if Dogen is actually all these facets compile and in the generated tests, if they pass. We're checking all of that. And yeah, it's a very useful thing. And it's also particularly useful to do that in a Valgrind sort of environment, because then we check to see if there's any allocation errors that we introduced. So that's really, really useful. However, the tests originally were not designed to take into account full generation. So if we were to test the code generator against that, the test would fail because, of course, the code that's being generated would not match the expectation of the code being generated. And then we'd have an error in the tests. So we created this very strange notion of pristine, which is the source code without full generation. And then we do all the rigmarole of full generation inside of the Dogen folder. And then we point the test to pristine so that the test would still pass. Now, I vaguely recall reading something that Linus Torvalds said once, which is developers are always looking for things that are not exceptional. We don't really like exceptions. We don't really like things that work differently. Because when things work differently, then you have a different flow that is similar but not the same. And that always causes problems. And that's exactly the problem we have here. So what we realized when I was recording the last episode, which wasn't really publishable because it had so many problems, what we realized was that actually the right thing to do is to make this less exceptional. And the way we do it is by supplying full generation to the tests themselves. So I did a series of commits on the previous non-recorded video where we added support to do the overrides on the tests themselves. And by doing that, that means now that the test should pass if even when we're using overrides, because the tests themselves would also take into account the overrides. So now the generated code will match the code that's inside of the directory, and the test will now pass, which means we don't really need pristine anymore. So now that's all fine and dandy, and that should have worked, but we did that last night, and lo and behold, nothing particularly special seems to have happened. We seem to have a lot of errors. The nightly did not run. As you can see from here, we still have the nightly from the previous day. So last night's nightly failed with this error. So that's where we are at present. To cough, sadly. Bit of a cold coming, I'm afraid. So then, we just need to figure out exactly where things went so wrong yesterday in the script. And also, while we're here, we probably should try to get rid of perhaps these two directories, I think. And then probably the logs as well, just make sure we, yes, please. So let's start from a clean slate. Right, so now let's try to understand, okay, I was doing quite a lot of hacks in it, sort of very quickly, and suspect that is where things went wrong. Let's just try to get this a bit closer to my screen. So presumably the hacks related to, oh, actually, interestingly enough, we also tried to enable yes, we tried to also enable, let's just do a quick login here. Try to enable the C++ reference model, reference product. I'm not entirely sure that succeeded either. Okay, right, so that did succeed. So that is not too bad. We did manage to get a nightly going here. A lot of failures. And some errors in the building as well. Which is a bit peculiar. Right, well, this is probably because we still haven't moved the reference implementation to the presets, and it's probably just failing to find a compiler or something. So I think this is actually probably a success. What is a failure definitely is Dogen itself, because we didn't even build. So we'll leave that as is and worry about it later. In fact, I'm not even sure we've moved over to GitHub CI on the reference implementation. Yeah, so we haven't even moved over to GitHub CI. So we've only done the work for Dogen itself, which is fine. Something else for next sprint. So what we're trying to do then is, let's try to see why we failed so badly here. This looks about right. The clone also, well, actually, to be fair, we probably want to comment this out because we don't even waste time building the reference implementation for now. So we're doing a clone. Then we try to build the code generator first. Then we try to regenerate everything. So what we'll do is we'll just try to see what is going on just with these first steps. So it's all up to date. Just going to do a clone. In a second, I might actually just remove the RM, make things a bit quicker. VC package takes a long time to check out, and even more annoyingly, we're not just setting the depth. We don't quite know how to do that. So we're checking out the whole history of VC package, which is quite huge. Which also reminds me, I wonder what's the version of Boost in the latest VC package. I wonder what's the quickest way to find out. I think we might have to port. Not sure it's very scalable, the approach they've done with VC package, because there's so much stuff in these directories. See if one of these guys gives me a clue. 180. Okay, cool. So Boost has been updated. So it's probably time for us to update our VC package setup. And the latest Boost, in fact, I should have been here. The latest Boost is probably 181, I guess. No, 180, so it's very, very recent. So we should really try to update this to latest, I think. In theory, that should be really easy now. We just have to update this the submodule in Git, and that should work. Okay, cool. So here we are. So here's the error. The checkout worked just fine, but then at line 87, we are doing something a bit silly. So the Git is here. Yes, I think I know what's going on here. We should have called this master. Yeah, we should have called this master. Let's try again. I think we were checking it out. In fact, we probably should have checked out what the directory name was before. But nonetheless, yeah, this should match that, whatever that is. So, like I was saying, while we were waiting, what's new in Boost? No new libraries. But the good thing about it is at some point we will be able to use some of the new features in Boost, such as JSON, for example. That would be quite a useful thing to do. And interestingly enough, it doesn't seem like there's any updates for the HTTP web support. Something else we are quite keen on trying to make use of. Beast, there we are. So it's always good to be the latest Boost, really. Okay, so we still have a problem. Let's have a quick look at what's going on here. Oh, okay, so that didn't work very well. Where are we checking out then? Oh yeah. So the problem is we are not tiering product, but we are not really checking out products. So -rf.master. Let's Dogen. Right, there's a lot of silliness going on. We should probably focus and make this a bit quicker. So products, workspace. You know, of course, that I'm doing this master directory just to follow that preset structure. That's why we are doing all this silliness. Now the checkout should go in the right place, hopefully. The other problem as well that I forgot to mention with the 90s is that we seem to be running too many tests. So you can see here we seem to be running the test twice. And if I'm not wrong, 1180 is exactly 590 times 2. So that's something else we have to look into as soon as we got this thing working. So let's just do this again. In fact, while that's going, let's have a quick look as to why we're doing something silly. If you look at the ctest script, the steps are ctest build. I think the problem is probably going to be that we're running the wrong target. Yeah, okay, we're running package, so that's good. So the target is right, package, and then test, of course. Ah, interesting. So I wonder if I wonder if we should not do a test if we've done a mem check. Maybe that's the problem. So let's have a quick look at how this used to work. Again, wrong window. If we just have a quick look at how the world used to look like, maybe last release. We used to have a script which was this guy here. I wonder if we had an if so yeah, these are the steps, right? Ctest start, update from Git, then ctest test, and then with coverage, ctest coverage. Yeah, it seems like we're doing a mem check. I wonder if all this time we've been doing the test twice and never noticed. So let's have a quick look. Ctest mem check. What does that do? Yeah, I think quite incredible. I think all these years we never really noticed that we were running the test twice. First with memcheck and then again without the memcheck. So I think this should be either or. So if with memcheck, then we do this guy. Otherwise, we do that guy. I think doesn't make a lot of sense to do both. Not that it makes a huge difference, to be fair. Yeah, we'll leave it like that at the moment because we had it before. I need to have a think as to why we would want to run the test twice. It seems a bit strange thing to do. But one is with memcheck, the other one is without memcheck, so perhaps that's why. Right, as you can see here, things have improved dramatically. We are now doing something, which we weren't before. So if we just have a quick look at the logs, right, this is not very inspiring. For some reason, I assume this is previous, so let's just stick with CLI for now. The reason being that CLI I think is first, yeah, exactly, so that's probably the previous one. So a bit of luck, this might take us where we want to do. So what we expect to see here is we expect to see full generation with a whole lot of files generated and then a commit of those files. To cough again. Quite annoying to have a cold in the middle of summer, but there we are. Yeah, I still debating whether I should run these tests twice or not. With the advantage being that if the tests are failing because of Valgrind, at least you know it is the Valgrind failure, right? But then again, we have CI, so it is interesting. The reason why, of course, we never noticed this before is because when we generate tests, we run a lot of tests. There's like about 5,000 of them. And so these extra 590 were there, we just never seen them before. It was not very obvious. But now that we are not running the generated test, it becomes more obvious. So I probably should create another shell here, I think. Just so we can keep track. What's this just going away and doing all the building and so on? Happily. Ah, interesting. So that's finished. Now then, we're just gonna have a quick look at the logs, make sure that this all looks healthy. And, interesting. So as you can see here, nothing happened. Right, so nothing happened. So that then means that we failed to override the settings. So which yes, so that makes sense. We did not set full generation. So what we need to do is to say with full generation. Right, so now let's just have a quick look to make sure we understand how exactly this is working. So if I go to our CMake file and look for with full generation, right? So with full generation is the CMake option, which we read, and if it happens, then we supply these parameters, right? So, and then if you go to see tests, right, if we are in the nightly group, then we expect full generation to be supplied. Let's just say message status full generation is on. And for the measure, we should probably do the else. Let's make this very visible. Right, so this would now tell us whether full generation is on or not. What do we think? We think that at present, full generation is not on. Now, the reason why that's happening is actually quite obvious. What's happening here is the following. We don't really read the environment. That's what's happening. We don't really read the environment. So to be clear, we are basically saying if you're building a nightly, then you want full generation, which I think is fine. But there's a mismatch here, isn't there? So the problem is this guy here is not coming from the ctest script. So when we run this guy, it is not doing full generation. So presumably what we really mean to say is something like -d, no, not quite that, but something like that in the nightly. Something like this, right? So we're basically saying when you are trying, in fact, maybe not even there because that's the actual building. So we probably want to set things up here. So this guy is now basically saying, well, actually, I wonder. In fact, I'm not even entirely sure why. Yes, so the right thing really should have been, we set up full generation, we build the code generator, we don't really need to rebuild, re-CMake because there are no different environment options, so we can just do two targets here. So we can basically say first generate the code generator, make sure full generation is on, generate the code generator, and then generate all org mode models. Then add everything you got and then commit. That seems sensible. Now, however, we have a problem, and the problem is we rely simultaneously on the environment as well as the CMake option. And this is where we ask the question, if full generation is on, we probably, I mean, again, I don't really like this. We are doing this, this is becoming very, very complicated. It's supposed to be something really simple. But if full generation is on as a CMake variable, we probably want to set up the environment for it, because otherwise the test will fail. Now, the question to be asked is, should we set it up from here, or should the user need to set it up? And I think I'm going to say, let's say maybe we should set it up. So CMake environment variables, and I think we should be able to set up an environment variable. Very important. They're not subsequent built or test processes. Okay, cool. No problem. It's fine. So CMake's not going to help us. So let's just basically then say it is your job before you run the tests to export with automation on. And that being the case, I think this will work. So right, I suspect this would do. Might save ourselves some time and do a quick hack here and say don't bother RMing. I'm just going to quickly hack this to make this a bit quicker. But so hopefully this will just basically say everything is up to date. Okay, good. And so now we're going to go and do a generation. Meanwhile, I will uncomment this. Interesting. That's slightly unexpected. Now it flies here. Let's have a quick look at what happened there. What did I say rightly? So something strange happened here. Okay, good. With presets not defined. Excellent. So, no problems. What we're going to do is for now, as a quick hack, we are going to say with preset. No, that's not what I intend to do. I intend to go back to my script, which should really be renamed. And let's just say that with presets is equal to off. I wonder if off is the right value for this. Presets. Yeah, just one probably. Not one, actually, no, that's fine. So let's call that off. Now, we don't really need this anymore, but we're just going to do it for now, just to avoid confusing too many things at the same time. And that would hopefully enable us to run this thing. We did record. Okay, so we got 29 minutes, so I think we're quite close to this. I mean, we're probably going to finish this series of videos with today's video Oh, interesting. Ah, I forgot to comment out the RM and SRF. As I was saying, we're probably going to conclude this series of videos with this episode because we're not very far off now of finishing this. We just have a couple of minor problems. They're annoying and they take longer when we're recording because I have to concentrate on recording as well as thinking. So I never am very productive that way. But the gist of it really is that I just want to see the generated code being generated and the tests running, the generated tests, which hopefully we'll be able to see in this video. So we're here at the moment. So as soon as we see dogen.gcc, we'll just have a quick look to make sure that we created one large commit with a whole load of generated code. And if that happened, I think we're kind of more or less there. And if this build then starts, of course. Sadly, this is something that takes quite a while to do, so it's not very recording friendly, really, because every time you do one of these runs, it takes about an hour or two to finish the complete run. Probably longer than that. So what we're going to do is, while we wait for this, we're going to quickly get rid of the presets nonsense. So we don't need with presets anymore, because now it's always going to be with presets. So I'm going to remove it from here. And then if not with presets is no longer relevant, so we just need to get rid of it. This is just telling us the compiler that we selected. I don't think it's useful for anything else. And with presets is now always the case, so I think that should be it. So that no longer causes problems. We can, well, we probably should just do a quick build to make, oh, actually we can't even do a quick build because that's the CMake thing, so we have to testify the nitro, so not much we can do that. Okay, so we're still on Dogen for generation because it's generating the code generator. Particularly interested in seeing the git add, if I'm honest. Ah, that's beginning to look good. And I think it's probably even completed. Yeah, I think the git add is completed now, so not entirely sure what is this thing doing. Should have been on the commit already. Most interesting. Quite peculiar. Is this a previous git add, perhaps? .23 past seems. Yeah, perhaps it's the previous one, and we're still. Yeah, I think one thing we should probably do is we should probably RM the logs. I think maybe. Yeah, I think I'm going to do that. One thing I don't really like is my issue is a bit strange at all. So very first step, we just do a quick, no, perhaps not quite here because we need some variables, but let's just do a else, and then we just do an rm minus rf, I guess, so we ignore any errors, and then you say just delete anything in the logs directory. Though having said that, sometimes it's useful to look at the previous run. Okay, for now we're just going to do this. Let's just do a start.log just to be on the safe side. It's always bad to do an RM on SRF. In fact, I think F is enough to recurse anything. I think this would do it. So create a logs directory, echo logs. At least we know we're looking at the right logs, we're in problems like the one we're having right now. So that's going away in building. We've already removed it with full generation. I'll do a push in a second. Sorry, with presets. So that will solve that problem. Everyone is using presets here. And hopefully, okay. Stop for a second, something's not right. 990, ooh, 992. Not entirely sure why reset on line 92. Peculiar. Right, so quite a few problems actually. Thought we were close to the end, but so the first problem is seems to think we have a typo on preset. I don't quite know what it's all about. I'm very confused. Particularly if you're asking about line 92, clearly nothing particularly wrong with line 92. Although, yes, we did increase the file by 4 lines. So let's correct line 96. Not clear. Well, what we do know is that Gao comes straight after. So presumably it has to be the line just before. Can't really see anything particularly wrong with these lines, if I'm honest. Very confusing. Let's just have a quick look at the Gao, the CLI log. Oops. So that seems to be okay. We built CLI. Yes, no, I know what I've done now. Okay, sorry, I apologize. I said I didn't really need to reconfigure, but that's a mistake. We do need to reconfigure so we pick up the code generator. So that's definitely a problem. So that should now give us the Gao. And then we got the git add and everything else. Okay, so that solves that particular problem. What I'm finding very strange though is we seem to be looking for something in line 92. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to make our life a little bit easier by taking away the RM. And we're just going to run this again. Hopefully this will be slightly quicker. Right, as you can see, that was awfully quick. Slightly too quick, my liking, but now we know the logs are all up to date, so we know that our git add is ours. Yes, correct. And we did add a lot of files, so if I just do a word count minus lines on the git add, you can see, okay, that's reasonable, 2600 files. And we also think that we're running the GCC stuff, so that looks vaguely sensible. So I think we know. Okay, no, that looks right. It's just the file already exists, so that is probably all right. Let's just have a quick look at the gal.log. Yeah, that looks good as well. So that doesn't look too bad. Just need to see if we are going to run all the tests. So we'll leave this running. We've sorted out the presets issue. I think that's good. So we just now need to make a decision as to whether we should rerun the tests. So coverage, I think. Yeah, I think we're just going to leave this as it is, because I think what's happening at present is that we are running the tests, we're then using that for the code coverage stuff, and then we are mem checking. So yeah, for now we'll just leave it as is, and then I think we're probably going to end up breaking something if we change this, and we don't really have a lot of time to faff around with this. So we'll leave it as is, and let's just try to at least get one of the nightlies going. We still have another 20 minutes, so sadly, as I said before, this is a bit annoying now because we just have to wait. Not much we can do meanwhile. So, and on top of that, really the test we want to do is a full test. So what I'll do is I'm just going to push this change here. I think it's fine. We don't really need this anymore, so that's cool. That's just a backlog, and what we'll do now is, while this thing is running, we're going to need presets. Remove the presets from here. And then we're going to update our copy of the cron script. I should probably symlink this, but we're just doing it the lazy way at present. So build scripts cron. And because my Emacs is a bit messed up, I have to do it the hard way. So let's call this more work in the nightly, I guess. Okay, that I think is everything we need for now. I will push this. GitLab was down yesterday. Let's see if it's up today. Looks better. And now, for good measure, I think I'm just going to, actually one thing we did not do, we should have probably done. We should have uncommented everything here. I mean, it's probably better to do a full test, really. So update again nightly. We can see it's a bit annoying having to copy and paste, but that's what we got once. So okay, so that should do the trick for this. Now, of course, we still don't really know whether the tests are going to pass, so we will leave that running. I'm not going to cancel this build because what I really want to know is I want to see if the tests are going to take into account the new environment variable that we set. So that's still a good test. And there is not much we can do in this front now. So let's just have a quick look at our sprint backlog and see if there's anything we can do while we wait for this build. Could be an hour, could be quite a long time. So to be fair, I think I'm going to clock this not against this story, but against this story, because we've more or less finished implementing the test thing. We're just waiting to see if it works or not. So I think we can say that that story is completed. So what we got here then? Sorted improvements to CMake files. I think this is done. It's a bit of a vague story really, because I mean, we didn't do client tidy. Maybe we'll leave this story open and put it back in the backlog, but this is definitely for the backlog. This one as well. This is a complicated story. This is also a complicated story. This is a very, very complicated story. So I think what we're going to do is all of these stories are going to move to the backlog. And we will close the sprint, I think. Yeah, we'll have to close the sprint today. So I'll just wait for this build to finish. I think there's not much we can do. So okay, I'll just do a quick recap then of what we've done here. So the basic principle, basic problem that we had was that historically, the nightly builds are different from regular builds, from regular CI. And they're different because we wanted to test, in fact, we should push the latest change. No, it doesn't really make a lot of difference actually. So the nightly builds are slightly different from the regular CI builds. They are different because normally, if I take any model of these, for example, codec, you'll see that in codec, we only generate a few facets. In this particular case, we're generating the types and the IO facet. However, there are many, many other facets that Dogen generates that are not enabled for this particular model. And we would like to test those facets as well. So what we do is we have an override that forces Dogen to generate all facets. So if I quickly jump over to the Dogen directory and look at that very same model, codec, what you'll see here is that there's a lot more facets now. There's a hash, there's a ODB, serialization, test data, and so on. So these facets all got generated because of the override. And now we're going to test these facets, make sure that they're actually compiling. And we have a series of sanity tests that also get checked to make sure that the build's working, the code generator is working correctly. However, the problem with that is that we now generate a workflow that is slightly different. In the past, the way we did that from what was being tested, the way we did that in the past was we had a test directory called Dogen Pristine that contained the very same structure that you see in the Dogen Git repo, so that the tests would pass. But at some point it occurred to us that actually, what if we just simply got the tests to also generate all facets? In other words, use the overrides that like we're using for the code generator. And that would actually be a more sensible thing to do, because that means that we are now testing the full generation as well. So we spent some time adding that feature to the test so that they will read the environment, and I can very quickly show you what we did. It's actually very trivial, really. We immediately added the environment variable to the construction, the construction of the code generator, and then eventually it gets supplied here to this mock factory that creates the configuration. And if the environment variable is set up, then we also add the overrides for the tests. So with that, the tests are now also going to test full generation rather than just partial generation. And that also means that now we can make use of presets, and the nightly build becomes much more regular. It becomes similar to CI, very, very similar to CI, with this little change of full generation. And so what we've done with all of these changes is just to clean up all of this, the nightlies, to take into account this full generation. Let me just get rid of this log. And with a bit of luck, this will now run all the generated tests, which are 5,000 or so, across all facets. So with this, I'll consider concluded the sprint target, which is to get the CI back up and running. I think we're still going to be hobbling a bit because, as you can imagine, we still have problems. We still have all these failures coming up in Clang for some reason. We still have, weirdly enough, a lot of defects. Interesting enough, we have a lot of defects on GCC and failures in Clang. So I'm not really quite sure what's going on here, but something else to look for. So we will probably start next sprint by trying to tidy that up. We will probably also start next sprint by trying to get the reference product building again, because we can't really start making changes until CI is under control. And once all of that is out of the way, hopefully then we'll be able to go into look into features. So I suspect the target for next sprint is going to be a cross between completing the CI. So part of that is going to be this, and then the other part is going to be going to the product backlog for the V2 stuff and seeing what we can achieve in terms of V2. Righty, and that's all for this sprint, I think, and for this series of videos. Thanks very much for watching.